I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and with me today is the updated 2021 Hyundai Kona, which has come in for a more comprehensive midlife facelift than most vehicles tend to get in this segment. That's not because the Kona wasn't doing well beforehand. On the contrary, it really was. The Kona accounts for almost 1 in 4 Hyundais sold in Australia, so it's just behind the i30 in terms of its ranking for this brand. And that's exactly why Hyundai have given it the changes they have. It's to keep it ahead of the curve. Personally, I think the new look actually really works. With me today is the N-Line premium version of the car, so it does look its best, and I think the body-coloured cladding really highlights the lines of this compact crossover. But the entire range has received a refreshed look that just tones down the lines a little bit, makes it a bit more of a coherent design, and I personally like it. Of course, that's subjective, and you can let me know your view down below. Now, in today's video, we're going to take a look inside the refreshed 2021 Kona. We'll check out the back seat and the boot. We'll also discuss the running costs of this vehicle, and then we'll take this N-Line Premium with the 1.6 litre turbocharged petrol engine out onto the road. But before we do that, make sure to hit subscribe down below the video. The changes outside the Kona are really prominent to see, whereas the updates in the cabin are a little bit more restrained, but there are a few nice changes where it really matters, and that starts with the technology, where a 10.25-inch touchscreen is now standard across most of the range. The two lowest specifications, the base model, which is now called Kona, and one step up from that, which is called Active, they have a smaller 8-inch screen, but it still works pretty well. Hyundai's software is really intuitive, and it's clear how to use most of the functions. And one benefit of getting the 8-inch screen on the low-spec cars is that it has wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. Stepping up to a Kona with the bigger, crisper, higher resolution widescreen means that you actually lose that wireless smartphone mirroring capability. Now, as we know, the Hyundai Motor Group is engaged in a bit of a spat with one of the large technology companies, either Apple or Google, to do with the wireless systems where they have integrated navigation. Apparently that situation is no closer to being resolved, but this system actually does have the technology behind it to be able to support those technologies. It's already pre-installed in the car, which is quite interesting. Now, ahead of the driver, the most expensive models get a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster, which is really high resolution and looks good. You can put navigation instructions there, you can see detailed trip computer stuff, and it's just a really nice screen. Even if you can't put a map there, it's not like to the extent of an Audi virtual cockpit or anything like that. Now, ahead of me here, there's an N-Line specific steering wheel, but it's still a round wheel, which is nice. I prefer that. We've got some perforation, some red stitching, feels pretty good in the hand. There's also an N-specific shifter down here, which looks pretty cool. It's the same shifter that you're going to get in the i30N DCT and the Kona N DCT later this year. We're also sitting in remarkably comfortable and supportive seats. Both seats here in the N-Line Premium have electric adjustment. They've got heating and ventilation as well. But even in the basic cars, which have manual seats, the seats are actually pretty good in the Hyundai Kona. And you can get into one of these things from just over 26 grand, although the car I'm sitting in here is actually over 42 grand before on-road costs, so it's a pretty expensive small SUV. Good thing then that Hyundai has given it some soft touch materials on the dash at long last, even if the doors are still pretty much rock hard. Ergonomically though, it's all right. We've got an armrest here, and practicality is good too. Decent sized cup holders, incidental tray here, wireless charging standard across the range, which is good to see. The door bins are still on the small side, but one other nice touch is that the top spec cars actually pick up Harman Kardon audio, which sounds really good. Here in the back of the Kona, it's clear that this is a small SUV, but you'll still be able to get a couple of adults back here without too many dramas. I've got the front seat set to my driving position, and you can see I still have some leg room, just an inch or so. Toe room's fine because the driver's seat's actually set quite high in this car. And headroom, I've got an inch or so, even though this car has a sunroof which is eating into a little bit of headspace. So all in all, there's no real dramas, and you do get the benefit of the fact the Kona is a really small vehicle dimensionally, so it's going to be quite easy to park. So I think the trade-off is fair enough. Another good point is that the base of the seat back here is actually inclined properly, unlike so many rivals. So you can see it's supporting my legs. And then in terms of amenities, it's a mixed bag. We've got an armrest, which is nice. We've got 2 cup holders, so that makes it easier on a longer trip. We've also got heated outboard seats, which is actually quite a nice feature. You get that on the Highlander with the 2-litre or this N-Line Premium with the turbocharged engine. The Kona now scores 1 USB port for the back passengers as well. Map pockets on both seats. It's hard up here on the door, but you do get some padding down below. But sadly, there's still no air vents. And in Australia, which is a pretty hot country, and especially when you're spending over 40 grand on this spec, that's pretty unfortunate. Now that I'm a bit closer to the Kona, you can see that it's actually quite low set and squat. Now I like that, but it isn't as tall as some rivals, and whether or not it works for you is going to be a subjective thing. But it does mean that loading your stuff into the back of this small SUV is a bit easier because that load height is really low as a lot of hatchbacks. Now, as you can see, we've got some net action here in the boot, which is really good. It stops your bags from rolling around, and the space on offer is 374 litres, which is actually not too bad for this segment, a lot bigger than smaller cars like the Mazda CX-3. Now we do have a shopping bag hook on the left-hand side, substantial cargo cover as well, not a flimsy piece like some other vehicles. And then this boot floor opens up to reveal more storage, and then also a space saver spare, which is going to give you a bit more confidence for country touring. Now it's a manual tailgate across all the models in the range, but it is easy to use, and as I mentioned, the car is quite low, so I think people will be able to cope. And now it's a matter of jumping in the driver's seat and checking out what the Kona is like on the road. So what's the updated Kona like to drive? Well, just like it was before the 2021 upgrades, it's a bit of a story of 2 cars, because there's quite a lot of differences between the versions of the Kona that are fitted with a 2-litre engine, front-wheel drive, and a more basic rear suspension, and then the up-spec N-Line cars, which have a 1.6-litre turbocharged engine, all-wheel drive, and independent rear suspension. So I'll just talk about those differences separately to start with. So the entry-level Konas, or I shouldn't really say entry-level, because there's kind of 2 families of Kona. With the 2-litre engine, you can get it in base spec, active, elite, or Highlander, which is very highly specified but still has the entry-level motor. And they come with a 2-litre multi-point injected Atkinson cycle naturally aspirated petrol 4-cylinder engine with modest outputs, 110 kilowatts of power and 180 newton meters of torque. And in order to generate that torque, you need quite a lot of revs on board. However, Hyundai have made a big change in order to make that engine more drivable. It used to have a 6-speed torque converter automatic, which was fine. It now has a CVT auto, and I know if you're a car fan, it's always an article of faith to hear the letters CVT and think that that must be a problem. But actually, in the case of the Kona, the CVT is really quite agreeable, and it does make that 2-litre engine feel a little bit easier to kind of get moving, because you just have that sort of on-off accessibility of the torque. It just gets to where it needs to. If you need to accelerate away quickly from the lights, the CVT actually helps you do that, and really it's inoffensive. If you just want a Kona and you're not looking for any kind of spirited performance, the 2-litre gets the job done, and the CVT has actually helped the efficiency of that car notably. With the older version of that engine and the 6-speed torque converter auto, the efficiency wasn't great. We were recording like sort of 9 to 10 litres per 100 Ks in mixed driving. With the CVT on this launch test, we managed closer to 7. Now, that did include quite a lot of country driving and less town. I still think it's probably got about a 1 litre per 100K efficiency dividend, which is good. And then there's the N-Line cars. Now, previously you could get this turbocharged engine as an option on virtually any of the Konas. Now, they've got their own models they're attached to. So the N-Line and N-Line Premium come with this 1.6 litre turbocharged petrol, which makes 146 kilowatts of power and 265 newton meters of torque. So they found an extra 16 kilowatts compared to last year's version of the car. That you can't really feel that on the road, even though that is, over a 10% bump. It's not that evident when you're driving the car, but the turbocharged Kona does get along really quite well. It's definitely got enough punch. A bit more torque would be nice, but it's substantially more powerful and more punchy than the 2-litre. However, the engine is paired to a 7-speed dual clutch auto, which is now feeling outdated in terms of its shift logic. It's just a little bit slow, and at times when you get a rhythm up in the Kona and you're punting along a country road, and then the dual clutch just takes too long to respond. These gearboxes are supposed to be snappier than what they replace, but in the case of the Kona, it's just not the best dual clutch I've driven. The low speed drivability is actually pretty good, and it doesn't sort of roll around and have odd effects. It's just a little bit too slow when you're building up a rhythm with the car. So I found myself kind of yearning for a 6-speed manual or a good torque converter gearbox. So that's a bit of an interesting tidbit about the DCT. But probably the biggest benefit of going for the N-Line is that they have a better rear suspension. And on the whole, the N-Line rides quite a lot better than the other versions of the Kona with the 2-litre, which has a torsion beam rear suspension that can be a little bit rough over bumps, and it doesn't corner quite as well. So going for the N-Line, getting the upgraded rear suspension, and of course getting all-wheel drive, it makes sense, but then you are spending quite a lot on a Hyundai Kona. So if what you're looking for is a more affordable small SUV with better compliance, but also a turbocharged engine, then I'd probably look at something like a Skoda Kamiq or Karoq as an alternative to this car. But that being said, I actually think the driving dynamics are pretty agreeable no matter which engine you go for. That also applies to the steering and the handling generally. It's quite sporty, it's quite firmly suspended. You really know where the car is when you're driving hard down a country road, which of course is not the main mission for this car, but it can do it. And those suspension tunes actually carry over from the 2017 Kona, which was done all in Australia, so it's probably why the car feels quite well suited to our roads, and no changes have been made for the 2021 suspension package on this car. Now, in terms of refinement, Hyundai say they've included quite a lot more noise insulation for 2021. It is a bit quieter, noticeably quieter, but it's still not one of the quietest vehicles in the segment. Something like a Mazda 630 is quite a bit softer in the cabin than the Kona, but it's definitely not too bad. And in terms of vibration and harshness, they are well isolated. Now, the safety package is all right. We've got forward AEB with full braking to 85 kilometers per hour and partial braking to 180. We've got lane keep assist with lane tracing, and the Hyundai group are really, really good at tuning these systems. So the lane tracing is bang in the center of the lane. On high-spec cars, we've got blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert with AEB to stop you from backing out in the path of a car that's perpendicular. But no matter the price, you can't get the Kona with reversing AEB, and you can't get them with a 360-degree camera, but their 5-star ANCAP rating does carry over in the way that they do. But if you're looking for a small SUV that has the latest version of what's required for a 5-star safety rating, you'll be looking at something like a Toyota Yaris Cross. So those are my detailed impressions of the 2021 Hyundai Kona, which I think has come in for a nice round of updates. There's still a choice between a 2-litre engine, now with a more frugal CVT gearbox, which will work for most people, whereas if you're after something with a little bit more verve, the N-Line is a good package. But of course, those who want a proper out-and-out sporty SUV will need to wait for the Kona N, which will drive, well, definitely before the end of this year. Very exciting stuff. Keen to know your view though, so let me know your thoughts on the updated Kona down below the video. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.